Hello and welcome to Begging the Question, show where you ask the questions and we give you some answers. I'm Dan Vaughn. I'm the host of the show, joined by two amazing co-hosts, good friends of mine. You know what they're talking about. Dan Creel, welcome.
Hi, friend. I'm here. I'm back. I had COVID. That's pretty much what I have. I'm feeling better. I'm ready to be on camera now. So excuse me if my voice is a little hoarse or something like that. But I'm happy to be back for Begging the Question.
Love to have you. I did think it was significant when I reached out to you, said, hey, are you up for recording? And you said, I'm not sure I'm up for a Begging the Question.
Yeah.
And I'd like, does that imply that it requires some mental work on our part?
Some thought, yes.
I'm here for that. I'm here for that. Well, it's a good thing we've got our thinker right here. Some people call him, a dangerous little goal scorer. He's John Howard Fusco.
Sneaky.
Welcome to the show.
Sneaky little goal scorer. Evening, Dan. Evening, Dan. Yes, I'm going to hold you both up now for the show. So
yes, that's what happens. I didn't make the rules, or maybe I did. Well, welcome both to the show. I always like to start off with a little question, and Dan Creel, you're the perfect person for this.
Okay.
What's your snack of choice while sick?
Oh, what's my snack of choice while sick? Well, it's got to be tortilla chips. That I could just devour a whole bag of those. And when I'm sick, I usually it makes my appetite kind of ramp up, and I just don't care about what I'm eating. So I'll down a bag like crappy store brand tortilla chips. Just like scarf them down. That's it for me. Yeah.
Love it. And John Howard Fusco, what genre of book are you reading on the train?
What genre of book I'm reading on the train? Well, I'll tell you what I'm reading right now. I'm reading a book on Lincoln right now. So it came out last year. Pulitzer Prize winning book. Actually really good. A lot of
as person, most Pulitzer Prize winners,
as you would expect, right? Sure. Let's give it to a crabby book this year. No one's paying attention. No, this is actually well researched. A third of the pages is just this person's notes.
Wow.
Which I find as a historical writer, I find that very impressive. But a lot of firsthand accounts from people's journals and letters, and it's very interesting. Very interesting look at the personal side of him.
Love it. Excellent on both. Okay, let's get into our question. Let's do it.
Hi, protagonist. This is Andrew Nelson from St. Paul, Minnesota. And my favorite WPA project is Wade Stadium in Duluth, Minnesota. But to my question, do you think community ownership as a model can be scaled in the United States? We've seen a success with Minneapolis City SC and Minnesota Aurora FC and other places. And in Germany, they have the 50+1 rule where teams are at least 51% owned by fan members. Do you think that could be a solution to some of the issues that exist in growing soccer in the United States?
All right. Well, there you go, guys. Everyone loves this, don't they? Well, I know that U.S. Soccer doesn't, but
U.S. Soccer's agnostic. They don't care.
Agnostic.
Yeah.
So we talk about fan ownership of clubs. Now, currently in the United States, my understanding is that the rules around club ownership that this wouldn't be allowed, correct? Is that my understanding correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So, and obviously in Germany, that's the one everyone always points to here is Germany is the 50+1, meaning that 50+1 ownership, 50% plus one ownership of the club is required. Mm-hmm. You have to be owned by fans, which is again sort of that is the Bundesliga model, for better or for worse. I think for better. Let me just ask. I don't know how y'all feel about this. Dan Creel, you've been on break. It's only fair that I throw to you first. What do you think?
I mean, man, it's such a big topic. I mean, if you frame it as just in that, right? If you just frame it as in, is this a good idea? Sure, it's a good idea. Like to have community ownership of a club. It literally means your community has a stake in the club and benefits from it and is kind of has agency behind it, and they're going to support it, and they're coming out to watch it, and they're going to want to have the best, they're going to want to have a stadium and have people come out. So it almost, I'm going to say this, but it almost begs the question, right? If you have community ownership, then you have community ownership, right? And then the community is involved. I think the issue with the U.S. is that is a huge pivot for sports, right? It's a radical change for the U.S. soccer sports landscape. It's just for the vast majority of anything above kind of the smallest kind of amateur level kind of sports, there's not much community ownership of any sort. It's either a nonprofit, right? It's a small business. It's high schools, right? That's kind of where a lot of the energy and resources are when you think of community sports in the U.S. It's at the school level, it's high school, it's college level. Then when you get into especially professional, but even adult amateur, when you talk soccer, it's an LLC, right? It's somebody owns it. A person, usually a man, usually a male, owns this, or a small group of people own it, and then it's their business, and they promote it to whatever level or not, and that's kind of it. So, could it work? Yes, I think the issue is, I think for a lot of questions like these, and I'm going to say the term, like things like pro-rel, things like an open pyramid, the issue is not, could they work? Because I definitely think they could work in the U.S. at different, areas, different regions. It's a big country. How do you implement it? How do you make that change? Like, kind of what is the kind of a mover to create this kind of groundswell of community clubs? Because it can't just be one, right? It's got to be a group of them kind of happening. I think for me, that's the big question. Like, how do you sell this idea of community clubs to people who are interested in running soccer teams, soccer clubs, to shift from how we've always done it in the U.S. to this really different model? How do you market the benefits of that, right? And how do you bring about this change? I'll stop in a second, but we are a capitalist society. We're a capitalist economy, and that's where everything starts. And to kind of move away from that is really, really difficult in and of itself. So yeah, would it be a good idea? I think it'd be a really good idea, but how do you make that happen is for me kind of really the crux of really the difficult argument.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dan hits on a lot of good points about that, and this is one of the things that we keep coming into these situations because soccer is an international sport, it's a global sport where we are not. The United States is not the leader. We're not pushing the envelope. We're not the ones who are the trendsetters. We're essentially following, or in most cases, not following, and just doing what we want to do. But American sports it doesn't run that way. It's not community based. I mean, the lone exception, all that, of course, is, and if you brought up, is the Green Bay Packers, where it is actually owned by the community. But clearly, it's not a model that other clubs or teams want to follow, because it is the only one that does that. Everyone else is either a singular owner or it's an ownership group that's a controlling interest. And there's really no impetus, no incentive to change how that is handled. I joked in the beginning about soccer being agnostic, but the reality is that they are not interested in being the drivers of turning this around and saying, okay, we want our clubs to be community owned. They have no interest in that. Not that they didn't necessarily disagree with it, but there's no interest in being kind of being the ones pushing that agenda. So if it's not coming from the top, where is it going to come from? So it's going to come from the individual communities who decide they want to make it happen now. And we're seeing it happen here and there, but it's not something that's happening so much where you're starting to get this groundswell of like, hey, maybe this could work on a large scale. But you see some great examples of it. So you think like it can work. Can it work? Yeah, it can work. But where is there the real, as Dan mentioned, where's the real incentive to make it work on a much larger scale? And I think that's where we run into the issues. And a lot of these things, ProRel, open system, all these things need a large groundswell of support to really push the needle. And right now you just don't have enough of that. Especially you don't have it in places where people and their dollars really matter. That will really maybe push U.S. soccer to maybe want to be more involved in this kind of thing. But right now that momentum just doesn't exist. So it's a great idea. I mean, I like the idea. I like the idea of communities, literally putting their money where their mouth is and really wanting to support it and take ownership. But it's just a pocket here, a pocket there, and it's not big enough of a momentum, big enough. It's not happening in enough places where you can say, hey, maybe we can make a change for this.
So as y'all were talking, I thought of, and I think we kind of alluded to that, but the two most famous examples in lower league soccer where there was an effort to sell shares in the team. Detroit City did it first, and then Chattanooga Football Club did it. Both of them did it as they attempted to move from amateur to professional. They used it as a way to raise funds. It seems clear to me that as you all were talking, like what mechanism would cause this to become more normal? I think it has to do with clubs that have a lot of support, but not a lot of financial means. And so, because that's how you do this, basically you fund your organization rather than going to your owner or an investor and say, hey, give us the money to do these things that we want to do. You go to your fan base and say, hey, if everyone gives, it's a very socialist approach, right? If everyone gives a little bit, we can do this thing. Now, my question, Dan, is those two examples that I mentioned, Detroit City and Chattanooga Football Club, is that actually what those things were? Because I know that do the shareholders actually have any real say in the club?
I think, boy, it's been such a while since this was kind of a big thing. Like, do you remember during COVID? I think Chattanooga has something in their organization where they have to have a supporter person. I forget what it's called. A supporter representative who gets elected every year. Who's part of that. I don't think Detroit City does. It's here's the thing is that both Chattanooga and Detroit City are professionally sanctioned teams. They can't be owned that way and be professionally sanctioned. Like, you have to have a primary owner who owns something like 30%, at least 30%.
30%. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can't. Teams like Chattanooga and Detroit City, who are professional teams in the U.S., can't be structured that way for 50+1 or anything close to it because the rules don't allow it, right? So that's an actual functional, procedural issue with this. Like, U.S. soccer would have to make the change, but it doesn't necessarily. We always tend to focus up, but even so, lower than that, non-professional, that's open, right? You could do community, but you're right, Dan. It really wasn't kind of community ownership. It was kind of like community investment and kind of connection, which is fine, which is great. but it's not like the community has most of the say in how the club is run. And again, I don't saying this is a value judgment, but when Detroit City or Chattanooga FC made the move from NISA to Detroit City went to USL Championship. It looks like Chattanooga is going to MLS Next Pro. It's not like they had to have some big open meeting and get votes and things like that, because that's just not how they're structured. And that's period, which would be different in a 50+1 situation.
Well, I was thinking of another example. I remember when PDXFC took, to a lesser extent, as far as the amount of investment, but then chose to play in a league that many of those supporters were not happy about the team choosing. And so there was some complaints that, what did I invest my money into? If I had known this was the case, maybe I wouldn't. And so it becomes interesting, because I think that you did a good point of dividing. It's not necessarily ownership in these cases. It's much more like investment. We want you to invest in this club. We want, you believe in this club, you support this club, we want you to invest in this club. It's not really the same thing as what, the 50+1 model. I keep hearkening back to that, but is that the only model that I could, I can't think of any other clubs that are like that, unless I'm not the most informed world soccer person, but I can't think of any others.
Yeah, I think that's, as far as like the major leagues in Europe, I think that's the only one that has that kind of stipulation in terms of the ownership. I don't think the other major leagues, major soccer leagues in Europe, are structured quite that same way. Yeah.
Well, it feels like Andrew kind of brought it up in his question. He mentioned a couple of clubs that were amateur that were owned this way. Is that, and I know that Dan, you kind of pointed to that's where the rules no longer apply. It's the wild, wild west. Couldn't you, in theory, create a league of clubs that you require that in an amateur setting?
Yeah, I think below the professional side, there's not that requirement. There's not the professional soccer license, whatever it's called. I can't remember what it's called now. It's necessary that U.S. soccer imposes on the professional level. The amateur, it's not there, right? It's just whatever business model is available to you. So yeah, you could create a league that says this league is made up of teams that are just use 50+1. You have to be a 50+1 organization to be part of this league. Yep, you could totally do that. And I think if we're saying, okay, let's see how we can make this happen, actually digging into, making Andrew's question happen, I think that's what it would have to be. You would have to be get a group of like-minded clubs who either are community owned or want to be community owned, and they want to grow together and be a community of community clubs, right? And you create a amateur level league of those clubs. Yeah, that's definitely something, and it's more available to you. And I think that's probably how maybe this trend could happen. You create a league like this of teams, and you get together and you play and you prove it to other places, and you say, this is what we did here, and you should try this too, and you get more teams together, and you create kind of a groundswell and change the minds, and like ask US Soccer to kind of maybe make a new level or change the rules to allow more of this type of thing, because unless there's a reason for them to do it, they don't have a reason to want to do this. They don't care about community level, the US Soccer level, unless you make them care about it or say prove its importance in some way. So that would probably be the best avenue if there's a kind of a community out there who wants to create more of soccer clubs like this. That's probably the avenue to do it. I would say at the amateur level, get a group together and kind of form a coalition and form a league and be some type of shining beacon to kind of show how great it is. Yeah, and try to prove it to the rest of the country.
I mean, John, one of the big complaints a lot of people talk about when it comes to amateur soccer is the lack of buy-in from fans. Fans won't show up. Isn't this the ultimate way to create buy-in by literally having a buy-in?
I mean, it certainly could help, but I don't think that in itself is going to drive community interest in the club. I think it really comes to the club first, showing a genuine interest in being part of the community. I think you have to start that way first, and generate the kind of interest, and then I think you can probably work into the buy-in of ownership. I think with rare exceptions, I mean, we've seen exceptions. We've seen amateur clubs who have just out of the gate, they just market it so well, they draw interest in so quickly, but more often than not, it's a bit of a hard sell. You have to really be out there, being part of the community and really pushing that first to really draw the interest. I mean, amateur soccer club is just it's soccer and it's amateur. It's just those two things that just they're just it can be a really tough draw. And soccer always struggles with permanence. People think, this club's here this year, they'll probably be gone next year, so I'm not going to invest the time in it. So it's hard. Running an amateur club is difficult, especially if you're successful and you get to play in tournaments and you're traveling around. It's it's amateur, but it can start to cost you if you're actually successful. So,
right.
So yeah, it's a tough space to be in. Anyone who runs an amateur soccer club, I give them all the credit in the world. And but I think just trying to do community ownership from the start, I don't think that in itself is going to be a big drawing interest. I think you have to start to generate the interest first, and then you can approach that.
And that's actually what I wanted to sort of. I was thinking, this is a strange comparison, but I was thinking of Karl Marx, just because I like big beards. But Karl Marx argued that to get to socialism, you first had to have capitalism. That it wasn't like you had to be able to build off of the system and kind of take it over. And that's, I guess, circling back to this idea, does a club have to exist to build that fan base before you can make that leap into, because it feels like if you're going to be fan owned, sort of requires that you have fans.
Yeah, I mean, I just go back to what we said before. The way we usually do things in the US is to have somebody create the thing first. I'm going to create, the Springfield Atoms, and then get fans, and then create a team. To be community based, the community is supposed to come together and say, we want to create a soccer team, and we're all going to go in it together. We in the US just do it a different way, so it doesn't lead, the way we do it doesn't lead itself to create community soccer teams. There has to be a lot more proactivity about this. You have to go into it thoughtfully and say, we're going to create a community team. We have created this community team, and now we're going to go play other teams, right? So yeah, I think you're exactly right, Dan, to say like, we're going to create a new pro team, right? We're going to, in whatever league, I'm going to create this new pro team. It just is opposite of, then we're going to turn it into a community club. It just it's just that's pushing against kind of, that's very difficult to do. You're going in the opposite direction, right? Everything's going to push, the winds are going to push against you, turning this non-community club into a community club. Would be just super difficult. It's really having to grow something from the ground up on a lot of different, in a bunch of different places. So it has to be a bunch of grassroots organizations all doing this together and coming together, playing together, and then kind of proving it to other people. It's just a radical change in how we create sporting clubs in this country. Yeah.
And the amateur size that you do see having strong followings, seeing them having 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people in the stands, they're not all community owned. It's not like they say, oh, we're getting these great fans. Let's now make it community owned. It's not an automatic thing. Some have, but a lot of others have not. They're still single owned or owned by a group. So it's not like this like automatic light switch, where like, oh well, we got fans, let's make it a community club. It's not even when it's successful that do we do that in this country.
Yeah, let's be real. That requires someone giving up power.
Right. Yep.
And
yep.
In capitalism, kind of frowned on. Excellent, guys. I think you did Andrew's question justice. Excellent work as always. Dan Creel, nice to have you back in the saddle, sir. Thank you.
Always fun. Always just a fun begging the question, to have that question come out of nowhere and have to think about it and then get to like pontificate about it. It's very fun.
It's one of my favorite things about the show is surprising you guys. It's my favorite. John Art Fusco, you're never surprised. You're always ready, and I appreciate that, sir.
Oh, well, I must cover it up very well, but yeah, good to always be chatting with you guys.
Excellent. Well, that's it for this episode of Begging the Question. We'll be back next week with another question right here on wherever you're listening or watching this podcast /video show. Thanks for being here. Have a good one. We'll keep begging the question.